Hey Candice, it's so great to have you here. What are you going to be sharing with the community today? It should be a fun session.
It is, yes. So I am going to share how to create a pattern in Procreate. And we're going to be creating a fun summer type of design. And I'm collaborating once again with Jimbo. We're going to be creating a summer pool scene today. I know it's hot pretty much everywhere, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. So we thought we'd go ahead and celebrate the end of summer with this. Okay. Well, I will go ahead and jump in. What we're going to do today is create a seamless pattern in Procreate. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And we're going to turn that pattern into a pattern brush as well. And then I'm going to show you how to apply that to an illustration. So here's the illustration. Again, we wanted to create a fun summer vibe. Jimbo will be here next week to add some lettering right in the center of this illustration. But this is the final product. And I'm not going to go into a lot of great detail today on actually drawing of the characters that you see here and the floats. Are really going to focus the session mainly on pattern making. But I did want to show you a couple things about this setup and this canvas before we get started, just so you have that background of where we're going.
Stunning piece, by the way. Love the color palette, the whole composition, how you frame things. I haven't seen this piece before, but yeah, it's great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been really fun. Jimbo and I have both had a lot of fun experimenting with the patterns that we created in this pack. Really throughout the whole creation process, we were kind of tossing ideas back and forth to really understand the whole time what the end user application is. And so it's been really fun to actually apply these patterns to illustrations like this. And that is what I'm using today, is I'm using patterns from that pack. So I am just going to kind of briefly walk through here. So not everyone does this. I will say Jimbo and I are on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to this, but I'm very organized when it comes to my layers in Procreate.
What are you saying about our dear Jimbo, Candice?
I know, and he gets it done. I don't understand how. I couldn't do it if I weren't organized, but he's amazing, and his brain works differently than mine in that way.
He's a creative whirlwind of a man.
Yes. So we have different approaches, but we both come to the end result together very well. But so I do keep my layers very organized. So you can see here, I've got the floats and the individuals here. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be adding the patterns into this illustration. I did use for actually drawing the characters and the floats. I am using Lisa Gland's Effortless Gouache brushes, which I'm a big fan of. And I'm also using her paper canvas effect from the same pack as well. So that really gives it a nice canvas. So that's where we're going today. I'm going to go ahead and jump out of this and then show you where we're going to be patterns. So this is the same without all of the patterns. So it's a little boring without the patterns, as you can see. So that's what we're going to be adding back in. And I'm going to show you various tools on how to do that. We're going to use clipping masks. We're going to use a Liquify tool and a lot of other effects as well. So to get started, I am going to show you how to create a scene. I'll start from a blank screen. So if you're following along, you can start fresh from a blank screen. So I'm going to click the plus sign here in Procreate to add a new canvas. Click plus. I have a bunch of presets here, but I'm going to just create a fresh one. I like to use 4,000 pixels personally. That works for me and the work that I do. I would suggest going bigger than you potentially think you need because, of course, Procreate is a pixel-based program. You never want to scale up. So 4,000, sometimes I use 5,000, and then just make sure your DPI is set at 300 at least. Okay, create. And we have our new canvas here. So the very first thing I'm going to do here is actually set up our screen to create a seamless pattern. These first steps that you're doing, I like to create a canvas that's already set up, and I can just open it up and create a pattern. So you may want to take these first few steps and just create your own template with it. So the first thing that we'll do is we're going to drop color onto our screen. So we're going to drag here. It can be any color. We're just setting up to create our pattern. Okay. So then I'm going to select the square I just created, and tap this left-hand dot, this node, and down to 2000 by 2000. So essentially you're halving whatever the size of your canvas is. And then you do have to click somewhere to release that. So just make sure you're clicking up here. An important thing is that you don't click outside of your canvas. You actually click, and I'm saying this like you can see my hands, so I apologize. I have to remember that you can't. But you can click at the top anywhere. You can click on the selection or the arrow icon, and that should release your selection that you just made. You just make sure that you're not tapping outside of your canvas, because if you do, you can nudge the selection, and that's going to create a seam in your pattern. So it's just very important you don't touch it in any way. So your first square created here, you're going to tap on your layers icon to open that back up. And then you want to select this layer that you've created your square on. So you can do that a couple different ways. You can just tap the layer and then click select. You can also, if I release that, you can also tap with not tap, but hold with 2 fingers on that layer, and that will select it for you as well. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. And then from here, once that's selected, you're going to go to save and load down at the bottom of your screen. Just make sure you're on add and freehand, and you should have the save and load selection. And then click the plus button, and that'll save your first selection there. And we're going to use this later to create our seamless pattern. I'm going to tap up at the top anywhere to release that selection and just do the same thing again. So drag and drop color, tap the arrow to select that, tap your right-hand node I'm going to now, and we're going to do this on all 4 corners. Change that to 2000 by 2000 and release that selection. And then once again, go back to the layers panel, select that layer, and now we're going to save and load selection 2. So that's the whole process. You're just going to do that for all 4 quadrants. So I'm going to quickly do that for scaling this down, creating these 4 squares in 4 different quadrants, and saving the selection so that we can use that to create our. Okay. So I've got 3 of them saved now. I'm going to go back and do the 4th one. So just drag and drop, select that, tap the node, and then change that to half your canvas size. So again, I'm that layer, save and load, selection 4. Okay. All right. So we've got our canvas set up to now create a pattern. So we can just clear this layer. We don't need this anymore. So I'm going to click clear, and then I'm going to set up our layers here to create our actual pattern. So I'm going to name this bottom one background.
Amazing.
And this top. All right. So once you've created your 2 layers, so you have your elements and your background layer, you can just select those layers together. So just drag to the right slightly with your second layer, click group, and I'm going to rename this one pattern. Okay, so now we have everything set up to create our pattern. This is where I save this as a template. So you may just want to save this as a template. I create a bunch of copies, and then I can just grab this to right away start creating patterns. So now we're going to jump into creating our pattern. For background, since this is going to be a pattern brush, we are going to go with a black and white palette right now. So I'm going to select white and just drag that onto the screen. And that background is filled with white now. And then for the elements, I'm just going to use pure black for that one as well. For a pattern brush, you do typically want to use grayscale. That works best. And then when you're actually using the brush, that's when you color it. So for this one of the patterns that we use in the illustration is a heart pattern. So I'm going to do that because I think it's fun and easy to show how a pattern is created with that one. So I am going to go to Lisa Gland's gouache collection. I'm going to use smooth line work for, I didn't mean to tap that, for my brush for this one. And then I'm also going to turn on my go icon. You can turn on your, if you go to Canvas, drawing guide, and turn the grid size all the way up so you have 4 quadrants. Then this will actually help you create your pattern, because what you want to look out for as I'm starting to draw these hearts on here is you want to make sure that your pattern looks especially good in the way you want it on these lines. So down the center and across, because those are going to be flipped outward and become part of your pattern that you can't edit later. That just kind of gives me a guide visually to make sure that my pattern is looking the best it can. And this is not set in stone. You can always go back and edit it. So for this, I'm really just, I want this to look really loose and hand drawn. So just find these hearts around here, different sizes. Kind of want it to have going in different directions. It just has some movement. Nothing's looking too similar. And again, this just kind of takes some practice to know what looks best. It does just take some practice. Always edit these elements later after you create your pattern. So nothing is set in stone here. So I'm just varying sizes here. Again, I want to make sure that it's looking especially good around the center area. So I may add one here, a couple more here. And I think we're pretty close. I would probably play around with this a little bit more, but I think for the purpose of the demonstration, I think we're pretty close to where we need to be.
They look great.
Okay, so thanks. Yeah, pretty easy. That's what I always say with creating patterns. Like, you can create a beautiful pattern just with doodles. And I actually love that about pattern making. I don't think you have to be a great artist. I think you just have to be creative. And even little crazy marks on the screen can look really cool as a pattern when it's put on the screen in the right way. So I really like that about it. I might add just one more here. And then what I'm going to do, so now we've got our elements in our background. I'm going to collapse this pattern. So just tap that to collapse. And now we are actually going to use those selections that we just created. And then back to save and load, and then selection 1. So you can see that first selection is selected here. And then I'm going arrow icon, so it's selected. And then making sure you're on freeform and snapping, you're going to click flip horizontal and flip vertical. Okay. And release. Again, it's really important here that you don't tap anywhere outside the canvas, because that will move your pattern maybe just by a pixel, and you will have a seam in the end. So just make sure you're not tapping anywhere. Okay, and then I'm going to repeat that process again. So we're just going to come back to our pattern, click select, save and load, selection 2, the arrow, and then flip and flip. Release that selection and just do that again. I'm going to select, save and load, 3, tap the arrow and flip those again. And then one more time and flip those. Okay, so now we have our seamless pattern, the start of it at least, and I'm actually going to turn this around, because with all that flipping, we actually moved our pattern upside down. I'm also going to turn off drawing guide here. We don't need that any longer. At this point, I can make any edits that I need to. You can see there's some gaps here, so I want to fill those in. You just want to make sure you're not going over the edge of the canvas. So I'm going to go back. Oh, and actually what we need to do is we need to make sure we open this back up and go back to the elements layer here.
Just to repeat that crucial point Candice made, do not draw over the edge at this point. So it doesn't matter if your original design that you've just flipped goes over the edge, but when you're filling in gaps, definitely don't touch the edge. Otherwise, your pattern will not be seamless.
Yes, and in here, again, you can also move things around. So just making sure you're on the Elements tab. I don't really like how these are sort of lining up too much. I think that's going to look strange in the pattern. So you can go back to the Elements, and you can, using your select tool, you can make sure you're on freehand, just circle around that and select it, and you can move it around on the screen. So you can do that as well. Again, just making sure you're not, don't want to move like this one over here on the right, that's going across the canvas to be the ones in the center. So I would, again, probably a few edits here. I'm not going to do too many just for the purpose of the demonstration. I think it's probably fine. But I do, and I don't want to do that. Let me just grab this one again. There we go. Now, sometimes I will scale up just a, and not like that. I want to do uniform for this. Sometimes I will scale up just a little bit. I probably would change this a little bit and move some things around a little bit more if I were going to do this for real, but I think for the purpose of the demonstration, it's fine. So what I would do here now is I'm actually going to duplicate this entire layer group that we created and collapse it, flatten it down, and duplicate that 3 more times. And then from here, I'm going to test this pattern to make sure that it does look how we want it to. And we're just going to shrink down each of these layers to half of our canvas size. Think about it, you're kind of zoom out essentially on your pattern to make sure it works. There we go. Okay, maybe I was just trying to go too fast there. I wasn't giving Procreate time to catch up. Okay, so there we have our seamless pattern. There are a few gaps in here I think I would go back and fix, but I think for our purposes of demonstration, I think we're good. So it is seamless. You can see there's no gaps, there's no pixel gaps in here. So we are going to go back to our pattern layer, and I'm going to just turn these off so we can go back to our seamless pattern tile. And then I'm going to copy this canvas. So going up to the wrench icon, click add, and then copy canvas. And then we're going to create our brush from here. So I'm going to go to the brush menu and click the plus icon here. There's a few things that I'm going to show you in here. I'm not going to show you everything because there's just a lot when it comes to the Brush Studio. I'm just going to show you the basics today on how to create a pattern brush. So I'm going to go to Shape, click Edit, and then Import Source Library. I usually go with hard, medium hard here, but there's all kinds of things that you can experiment with. So I'm going to do that, click Done. And then for grain, this is where we import our pattern. So I'm going to click Import and Paste. So that copies what we just selected. And then everything that you see in black is going to be white and vice versa when you actually draw the pattern. So I'm going to tap with 2 fingers to reverse this. And click Done. And then for rendering, I'm going to go with Intense Glaze for this one. You can test it out here to see what it looks like. You can play around with these rendering modes. I like to go with Intense Glaze. Usually, I think that works best.
I have to say the Brush Studio
and
is
then for Apple
amazing.
Pencil,
what you can do with it.
It really is so much you can do. So I'm going to turn opacity down on the Apple Pencil. So that's one piece that you want to make sure you do, because otherwise it's just going to be weird when you use your brush for the opacity. And then about brush, I'm going to change to, we're just going to call this hearts. And then we're going to click Done. And I'm going to test this out. I'm going to create it. And if you tap and hold on the check mark here, then it will just select that layer. And we're going to pick our color. So I'm going to go with this color here and then test out our brush. I'm going to increase this brush stroke here. And what I'm seeing, this is definitely too small. So I want to go back to my brush. And I'm going to change my scale. So I'm going to go back a lot. And then you can see our pattern here. So unless you want to make sure you don't lift your brush up, this will allow you to paint the entire pattern on this. If you lift your brush up, repeat pattern, you're going to get something like this. But there we have it. So we have our seamless pattern and we know how to create that. We can use that in our illustration now.
Stunning.
I am back to the original illustration that we were looking at.
I'm going to go a bit more quiet then, because very sadly, I've got 15 minutes and I have to jump out tonight. Normally I would go a bit long.
No problem.
So we might need to do a slightly sped up version for the composition.
Sure.
And back to you, Candice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to show you a couple things. I definitely want to show you how to apply the brush, at least in one place in the illustration. And really from there, you can kind of, there's not a whole lot of different things I'm going to do to create this illustration. Once I show it to you once, you'll kind of have the skills to be able to apply that wherever you need to in your illustration. So I'm going to show you this on this pink tube here. So if I go to my pink lady layer here, and actually, nope, I need to go to the pink float, not the pink lady. So the pink float here, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the brush that we just created, and I'm going to stick with that same color that we used. And I'm going to make sure I'm on a layer above the float. I'm going to paint on that pattern. And I actually want to scale that down just a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. I'll go here and paint that on. So we have that on here. I'm going to then actually turn this into a clipping mask. So tap clipping mask, and then you're going to have that pattern on your float here as well. So I'm going to turn the opacity up a little bit on here.
I love that. Easy as that.
Yep, it's pretty easy. And I'm actually going to move this highlight down here so you see the pattern a little bit more. And then I may also change this to multiply. There's some different things you can play with the settings. Turn that down slightly as well. And then one last thing that I sometimes like to do with patterns is I like to go to selection here and distort or warp and click on the advanced mesh, and you can kind of move it around a little bit and just get it kind of to look like it's actually wrapping around this float here. And that kind of just makes it a little bit more realistic for me. And then just release that selection. And there you have it. So that's essentially what I would do for the rest of this pattern here is I would apply that same process to all of the floats here. I did that for the bikinis on the ladies here. And I also created a grid background pattern right in the background as well. Yeah, for the background here. So I'm going to go right above the background color. And I'm going to select my grid pattern. I've already blown up the scale quite a bit for this one, and I'm going to pick just a dark blue. So again, just making sure that you're not lifting up your pencil. Let me go back here. Let me change this opacity up so you can see it. Just making sure you're not lifting up your pencil. You want to just cover the entire screen. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to that layer, and I'm going to decrease that opacity to where I want it. And then I'm actually going to go to the tool here called Liquify at the top. And making sure you're on push, I'm just going to kind of move my pencil here across. I'm going to change the size just a little bit on push. Oop, and that's not how much I wanted. Decrease the pressure a little. And just kind of run your pencil along here to kind of give that wavy pattern like you would have in the background of a pool.
That's so cool.
And that's it. It's pretty simple. And really everything else I did was using those same tools in this illustration.
Well, Candice, would you mind perhaps demonstrating that pattern process for the second floating ring there?
So I'm going to go to this layer, and I'm going to click the brush and select this wavy pattern. I like this dark blue color we have, so I'm going to stick with that and just paint that across the tube. I like to do it this way because it kind of looks magical when you select the clipping mask. It just appears. So I do it that way first, and then I go here, select clipping mask, and there you have it. So again, from there, you could either use the Liquify tool or warp. Advanced mesh. Again, I kind of just like to pull it around and have it look like it's warping around the tube a little bit. Just makes it look a little bit more realistic. And then you can play around with your opacity, and we can go to multiply. I like to use multiply and then reduce that opacity a little bit. And so there we have it. Again, that's
really
kind of
cool.
what I would do for everything else in here.
And if possible, could we see that process of creating the seamless pattern? I think, again, touch wood, it's a little smoother now. So anyone that missed a couple of details earlier on.
Oh, that be okay? for actually creating the heart pattern?
Yeah, but is there another pattern where we can demonstrate that process?
Sure, for actually creating the seamless pattern.
Yeah, please. I think people would find that really helpful.
All right, I'm going to go back to the gallery here, and I'm going to go back to my canvas that I used earlier. So I'm just going to delete everything that we have on the screen here. And I'll show you again how to do this. So if I'm back on here to the patterns element, I'll just start fresh here. So if you recall, one of the first things that I did when creating this pattern is I went to the layer panel here and I just drag and drop a color. And then from here, tap the node to I'm going to uniform, make sure I tab that, and take it to half the size of your canvas. Okay.
How do you choose which quadrant it resizes into?
So that's a good question.
Half the size, yeah.
Yeah. So if the node that you tap, that's the direction it's going to snap to. So if I'm tapping the left-hand node, it's going to snap to that direction.
Super helpful.
Yeah. Good question. And so then I'm going to go back to that layer panel and select it either with 2 fingers or click it and tap select. Save and load. And this is where I'm going to click that plus icon to add our selection. So I've already done this earlier, so you can see these 4 selections are already in here. But you would just tap plus and you would have your selections in here. Okay. And then once all that is done, you've done that in your 4 quadrants, you can just clear that layer. That's all you need to do. And then you set up your pattern to have we're going to have a background. We're going to have elements. And then I'm going to group these together to create our pattern. And then on the elements tab, that's where you're going to grab your black. I'm going to make sure that I'm back on my gouache paintbrush. And again, this is what I think is really cool about patterns is you can just doodle. I mean, I don't know, we could just do triangles this time. I think it's fun just to kind of try out different shapes. You don't have to be a brilliant artist to make really fun patterns. And that's one of the things I love about it. So just creating something fun here, just making sure you're not crossing the edges. It really can be anything that you want. And then what we're going to do here is actually make our pattern. So I'm going to collapse that group, go to the selection tool, save and load, click our first selection, tap that arrow. Oops, and you know what? I forgot to add a background. So you can see what happens there. If you don't add a background, it just grabs your elements. So we need to make sure we drag that white in. So when I collapse that now, when I click save and load, selection 1, it's going to grab that whole quadrant. Tap the arrow and flip twice. And just repeating that for each of your selections. Okay. And then from there, that's where we can, and actually, let me just undo this last one because I don't know if I did that last one correctly. Let me just go to the selection tool, do the third one again. Thought I had missed something there. Okay. All right. And then just collapse that group and duplicate it, flatten it, and duplicate it 3 more times to test out your pattern. Again, tapping on that left-hand node, reduce that to half the size of your canvas, and do that for each of your layers. Oop, I'm trying to go too fast again for Procreate to think. You do have to let it sit there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, that just drives me crazy sometimes that you have to, it's like 1 second, but it drives me crazy. And I made that one too small. So the best thing to do if you mess up like that is to just start over so you don't have any issues.
Yeah. Oh, it's so satisfying how it all just fits together.
It is.
Again, great process there, and hopefully it makes it feel easy and achievable for anyone that wants to make these types of custom hand-drawn patterns. Thank you. We're going to link up the places where you can find Candice, so please do go show her some love and support her, and thank you.